Today is the 14th of June, 2022. Thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to my official YouTube channel, as well as go to my website, www.susanmeeling.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com. Make sure to go look at my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, which is on my website, www.susanmeeling.com. So today, the 14th of June, 2022, I'm going to go over a few different factors, which, since it's getting close to Father's Day, and I'll acknowledge in the aspects of honoring, there's a few different factors as to what would be considered as Father's Day. Well, there's my biological father. And so I learned a lot from my biological father. As a matter of fact, in some factors as to certain situations which he didn't have understanding for, there is finding a silver lining and finding the silver lining, which I had authored, written, and compiled. And so I figured there were certain things that maybe in certain references he might not have known about and or understood, though may have saw certain things that he didn't realize that he had seen. And so I made that in an attempt, which I had acknowledged, in finding a silver lining. In finding the silver lining, I'm sure that in comparison to quite a few things, to his sense of humor, probably would be mild in comparison. And so that would be in that hypothetical of a reference point. So then there's Grandpa Nichols. And so Grandpa Nichols, which is my ex-father-in-law, he had taught me other things in regards of military background aspects. So while my ex-sisters-in-law called him retarded Army in comparison to retired Army, and that was what they had done in Fort Worth, Texas, and so on and so forth, I made the choice to not view it that way. And so while I have the viewpoint that veterans in specific, not saying that active duty National Guard and reservists aren't important, they are. However, veterans have a lot of information, not in reference to, they have a lot of information regarding different ways to survive, especially individuals who survived from the World War I and World War II time frame, veterans who survived from Vietnam and the Korean War, veterans who survived Desert Shield and Desert Storm, as well as veterans who survived the in-between time frames of those, including to the Iraq and Afghanistan aspects. And so in the way that I am, even though when I met him it was after waking up from my coma after my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, I had viewed things a bit differently well before then, though, including after. And so in the state of Texas, of course, there are plenty of veterans. Now, in some ways, in my opinion, there are those who have been misunderstood because mainly of either, I don't blame dependents who want to know, there are certain factors in the civilian sector that, in my opinion, have been a situation that has caused quite a few needless problems, as I'll put it. And so my biological father actually had informed me that he was a merchant marine, so that's a different aspect, and yet there are certain factors of. He had actually made an attempt to go to the Army during the time frame of Vietnam, but because he had tuberculosis at a prior age, they didn't allow him in. And then when the draft was put in place, his numbers came up. And for those who understand that, and he went through the same process all over again, and they said the same thing. Because he had had tuberculosis, he wasn't capable to be in the whichever branch he was called to. And so in those particular references, then you have to take in consideration to the time frame. So he was born in 1951. And yes, he was technically old enough. And yet you look at the time, and then there's Y2K. And for those who were in the technology sector as to that time frame, in coding most specifically, Y2K, everybody was concerned about the calendar. That's what everybody was concerned about, was whether or not the calendar on computers were going to have issues in regards of the correct year because of the 00 situation. And so for those who don't know, whether because they weren't alive during that time frame and or they weren't paying attention if they were alive during that time frame, the Y2K situation was a really big deal. It was a large scare across a lot of areas, because what would happen if? Well, then you have to take in consideration as to other factors in those references. And so in technology, for those who do know, when it comes to certain devices, and for those who don't know, but know patent laws, have a bit of an understanding or a background for this. So when it comes to technology devices, you have a 20, 25, 30, 35 year time frame where you can't go and just have it out on the open market regarding the general aspects in certain references. In other aspects, you can have certain things, but not necessarily. So you have programs which are capable and allowed, and that's different in comparison to the devices themselves. And so those who understand patent laws, there are a multitude of layers in those regards too. So in the Y2K time frame, there were a lot of situations, and it wasn't just in regards to the calendar. There were, anybody who knows anything in regards to various factors, that's just the small snippet in comparison. You can see in reference to the year of the 2001 election as to those factors, because in the 2001 election, you have the consideration as to how Florida went. In 2020, which is literally 20 years later, which is usually the kind of middle point as to technology aspects, you have the 2020 election that occurred the way it did. You also have, in the year of 2017, a massive solar eclipse that went across the entire United States of America. You had that occur similarly to a degree in the year of 1994 as well. It went in a different pathway, though, so for those who understand, in the year of 2017, the solar eclipse went from the area of the northwest down to the southeast. In the year of 1994, it was reversed. It was from the southwest to the northeast. That's why in the state of New Jersey, for those who remember the solar eclipse in 1994, as to especially Asher Holmes Elementary School, those who were in Mr. Lambert's class, we went outside from the area. For those who remember, there's the hallway that had the ramp, which is where 5th and 6th grade were. I think some 4th graders at that time. Mr. Lambert's class, if I remember correctly, was on the left-hand side. And from Mr. Lambert's class, I don't remember any of the other students from other classes, Mr. Lambert's class, we lined up and went out the door. So when leaving the room, we went to the left to go outside. And we were in the, not really the playground area, but where the playground led to the open field where there was the baseball area, baseball diamond or what have you, and so on and so forth during the time frame of the solar eclipse. Well, it was the exact opposite, especially when you take in consideration the solar eclipse in 2017. So in 2017, and you take a look as to the alignment of the latitude, or no, latitude is up and down, longitude, in reference to coordinates, the longitude line is within certain similarities to the specifics of the 2017 solar eclipse as to the amount of the solar eclipse that you could see, to take in consideration for those who would remember. And so in the references to that, as well as Y2K, then you have the consideration as to how, well, there was the factors of what occurred. And so depending on where you were in the world, I suppose it depends, or I should say the United States of America, because of the situations at the time. And so I noticed a lot of the plant life. I noticed a lot of the natural aspects, whereas when we went back in the classroom, everybody had to talk about what they noticed. And most of the people paid attention to the white card, or the technically two white cards. There was one white card that had a circle that was cut into it, and then another white card that was an index card that you could see the eclipse through in comparison. And so for those who remember that, I don't know how many actually do. I also know that there's the factors of the year 2001 after 1994 by several years. So there's that to take in consideration. And so I don't know how many people remember that. I'm sure there's probably a few in comparison. I don't know if, I haven't discussed that with anyone. I did send the original Finding A and Finding the Silver Lining to people that I could remember and had actual memories of as to that time frame, not just because of the t-shirt, the 94 t-shirt. I actually had actual memories. A lot of them I acknowledge I didn't necessarily forget, though I did remember in some ways, but it was very confusing for me, and I acknowledge that probably has to do with the after effects of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 when I was in basic training, the Army. And so in reference to the Y2K, well, I'm sure there may have been a solar eclipse that went through the United States of America in whichever pattern of. However, in regards to the comparison, it literally was the opposite in 2017. So instead of from the southwest or the bottom of California area upwards towards the northeast area, where New Jersey had about what would be considered as a gibbous moon, for those who would understand, for the larger capacity as to the solar eclipse. So in the northwest, such as Washington State and Oregon area, they would have a similar-ish time frame of the viewpoint as to what was seen in 1994. Well, you have the irony as to Y2K. In a different capacity, though, you have the NASA situation and Blue Origin and SpaceX and other companies that have gotten into space research and space flight. which in those particular references, the time frame between 1994, again, for those who were heavily into technology back then, would know a lot of situations that started being seen and learned about in the overall general sector. And while in the Midwest and the South, you didn't really have that as much, in a lot of ways in the general civilian sector, because in my guesstimation of that factor of the equivalent of the patents or the time frame of 20, 25 years, 30, 35 years before certain aspects can be released. Well, when you take in consideration that the Space Force of the United States of America, Department of Defense, was signed into office the year of 2020. So if you take in consideration of 1994 to 2020, well, that's almost 30 years. And so that's within the time frame as to certain situations. Those who have been involved regarding law as to the mainly the federal level, I would guesstimate more so than the local levels, the federal level of government as to getting laws enacted and signed after they've been written up, probably I would guesstimate takes between 10 to 20 to 30 years depending on what factors up in the comparison. Back then, especially in comparison to more modern times, because of back then not having the same amount of technology compared to now. And so in the particular viewpoint of 2017 to 2020, and if you take in consideration of Y2K, well, you have the 2020 vision as to a proverbial saying. And so I would guesstimate people who were the age of whichever at that time frame would have the capacity to relate to other individuals that would be at that time frame. So in reference to children who were around my age, so I was in 6th grade at that time, 1994, I was around 10, I think, or 11 years old. I think so. I think somewhere around there. There are those situations as to, if I remember correctly, in 1994, there was a calendar situation, and that's kind of what spawned, in my opinion, the 2000 or the Y2K situation. It was 1992, 1993, or 1994, where all of the calendars were printed with different years instead of what it was supposed to be. And so that's kind of something that I had remembered, but I also read the newspaper during the time frame. I've brought this up in maybe a handful, a very small number of official YouTube videos of mine before, and possibly a couple of my journal blogs on the Ornery PSA, which is through my website, www.susanmeling.com. And in the references to those particular factors, if I remember correctly, and then you take in consideration as to the orbit of the globe of the Earth around the sun, if in reference to NASA mainly, as well as other space studying countries as to what the actualities are, I wouldn't be surprised if in some ways the Y2K situation, especially when you look at the Apollo 11 mission, as to there are little bloops in between the particular interview at the time. And it says 1994, but it also has 1485. So personally, I had wondered whether it was actually 1485 because of the way certain governmental aspects are as to the actual missions regarding the Apollo timeframe, and in comparison to 1485 because of the situations regarding technological advances, and at those times, well before what would be considered more commonly known, such as the capability through Google searches and so on and so forth, as to finding that information. Which wouldn't be a surprise to me, especially in reference to the larger general public. Because when you take in consideration as to how many factors, what would be considered as the safest way to bring technology to the general public, and still, because of the way the factors are, to make sure there aren't certain problems because of. And so, in reference to my personal viewpoint or my opinion as to the time frame of Y2K, I didn't agree with certain things. So I decided to take a step back. I saw it to be more important regarding several other situations. Admittedly, I also was upset because of Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, which I had been invited to attend. And I went through the testing processes and everything like that. And then the occurrences as to, I don't deny it, I've had a little bit of I was a little upset as to those particular factors. I thought that there was more that I could assist with at the time frame, but you know, it was as it was. Nonetheless, in those references to if regarding the official YouTube video I had done previously as to the figure 8 orbiting, as to that factor, I wouldn't be surprised, especially as to the Navy, the Marines, and the Coast Guard, and such types of maritime work, as to having a different viewpoint regarding traveling across the oceanic waters. And in reference to something such as icebergs, well, having seen certain things beforehand, if it's been noted. And so if it's been noted in reference to not just icebergs, of course, though glimmers as to certain sites in the horizon area, you have where the Department of Defense has more recently released video footage of what's called the Tic Tac video, in those factors as to how long that actually may have been occurring. So in that particular reference, there's how Grandpa Nichols had told my ex-in-laws that the rack that Grandpa Nichols had earned was what Grandpa Nichols had earned. And you have the Chief Warrant Officer Tree situation, which told my ex-in-laws that the picture from JCPenney's was inaccurate. My ex-sisters-in-law, both of them, and their daughters had been upset because the Chief Warrant Officer Tree would not go into details until I arrived because of the legalities. And so that's similar situation as to certain types of factors where, you know, some civilians have needed to understand that there are protocols as to those factors, and there are reasons why. And so in comparison, where yes, the Chief Warrant Officer Tree had to speak with me. He didn't need to speak with my other ex-in-laws. He needed to speak with me about the JCPenney portrait. He needed to ask me questions. And so and this is actually the prime example as to why a lot of situations, and this is my opinion, as to why the armed forces of the United States of America, among a few others, make the decisions the way they do. So for those who know and for those who don't know, I had driven from San Antonio, Texas, all the way to Fort Worth, Texas, because that's where the funerary arrangements were arranged. And I went and dealt with traffic. There was a few other situations I dealt with at the time, which had to do with both Fort Sam Houston and the gift chapel, as well as the chaplain and the funerary director at Fort Sam Houston, where I did not learn until in Fort Worth that the E7 was not high ranking enough to be at an E5's funeral. Those who know about the IRR situation and that particular combination of those problems, and then taking in consideration the dress blue problems, you can take in those viewpoints as to what my ex-in-laws had failed to understand, even though Grandpa Nichols explained it to them and my own attempts to explain it to them before the year 2008. So in reference to IRR, where my now dead ex-husband, my ex-in-law's dead relative, had told them the same thing, those people actually believed that the IRR situation for an E5 infantry could change the rank as to paperwork to go in, and could pick where was stationed and so on and so forth in the comparison to the way IRR is. So when you get the metaphor as to Laurelland Funeral Home, those people actually thought that they could get the Chief Warrant Officer tree to speak with them in comparison to waiting for me to arrive. The one and only executrix. That's it. So in those references, they had the knowledge for the time frame of 2006, 2007, and into the beginning month of 2008 that their dead relative had claimed what he had about IRR. Then they had the knowledge from 2007 in reference to September regarding Grandpa Nichols telling them the problems as to the dress blues. Well, since they have the viewpoint as to the father and Father's Day coming up, well, here's this for my ex-in-laws. Now, before anybody thinks I'm cold in this reference, keep in mind that they had known about my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. They had known that I was pregnant while having a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain with 2 children. So, it's not really cold, although I will acknowledge those facts. So while those individuals might be upset, they don't really have a right to be upset, except for with themselves. So whatever the Chief Warrant Officer tree in that time frame had told them, which probably was the truth, which translated to they didn't have any rights at all whatsoever, and I was and remain the one and only individual who has those rights. I am the one and only sponsor, after all, as well. And so in those situations, if the individuals as to Georgia had shown my official blue ID card, the original one, well, then there's a different set of situations that they would have set off in a different capacity as well. Now, in those hypotheticals, if they did, well, that's a secondary situation to the time frame of 2001 regarding if that had been scanned in any location other than San Antonio, Texas, which in reference to the Y2K, as well as the 2020 election, would show the problems as to certain types of individuals thinking that they have a right to knowledge that they don't have a right to, just because of whatever their viewpoint is in that Mandarin sort of way, in my opinion. Now, I'm not knocking the Asian aspects. I have Cantonese and Mandarin. There is a reference point that is understood in reference to Tiananmen Square because of certain factors, as to individuals who thought that they had rights that they didn't in regards to China. So in reference to the situations regarding college students and how they've had their feelings, you can take in reference to the solar eclipse time frame of 1994 to 2017, compare it to the time frame as to essentially 20 years prior to the Vietnam time frame, as to what individuals who had either volunteered or were drafted in regards to the comparison of 20 years after 2000 as to the Y2K for those particular references to review and take in consideration. Now, as to those particular factors of a different version of time, not in a linear way while paying attention to some linear aspects, people who would be the equivalent of 12 years old at the time of 1994 would be capable in the year of 2017 to look back and see that time frame of as to the situations from as they grew up to the time frame of 2017 to look back and see the situations as to why certain technological aspects have been the way they've been. Individuals who are younger and don't have that background, well, there are those situations that can be explained and reviewed in those factors. And then you have situations such as Uvalde, Texas. Well, Uvalde, Texas occurred in 2022. Those who know of and or remember, there's Columbine in the year of 1998. And those situations to take in consideration in a larger capacity. And so when you look at the time frame as to the Vietnam War, more specifically as to what are known as Dodge drafters, the ones that ran to Canada because they didn't want to actually do anything because of whatever their opinions were. Similarly to the time after the 11th of September 2001 and how certain people were, not just in regards of active duty National Guard reservists, but also in reference to veterans and dependents, and then the civilian sector as to those references. In my opinion, as to the review point regarding Vietnam, granted I was not alive at that time, there were individuals in the civilian sector that wanted to pay attention to the prettier aspects in comparison, and anything that was considered real because of the gruesome factors as to, they wanted to have their opinions and feelings known in comparison, and then wanted those same individuals to go back over and take care of the situations while they had the comfort of their own what have yous. If you take in consideration as to Iraq and Afghanistan, in my opinion, you can see certain similar factors because of the way certain individuals were. But in the time frame of the in-between, the time frame between when Vietnam had ended to the time frame of before 11 September 2001, and the amount of prescription medications to the mental health aspects because of whatever opinions. If you look in reference to each and every type as to, well, you know, this person is this, and then you have the draft situations as to the male gender and the particular factors of how it was at one point in time, don't ask, don't tell. Then it was accepted. So then what occurred after it was accepted? Looking at the time frame of So when it was accepted, as far as the LGBTQP, they had the rights. Well, those individuals would know about what their family or friends as to those situations in the comparison of. And so, in my opinion, then you have the factors of what is feminism. Is feminism where you are only in certain capacities of for female rights where you pick and choose, or is feminism where you're held to the same standards as much as possible and as best as possible in those references? So when you take in consideration how now there are female snipers and female fighter pilots and so on and so forth, well, obviously individuals that had dodged the draft probably wouldn't be too happy about that. And in that hypothetical of stirring up needless drama, because it doesn't change the fact that they didn't go. And so in the metaphor as to crabs, where, they didn't have the capacity to, they did whatever, and later, sure, they could have regretted it, most likely. There are certain experiences that are just as they are. Well, those situations, a lot of video games started coming out while the prescriptions. You have the movies and the pop culture and so on and so forth. And yet at the same time, these veterans who have experience in a multitude of factors, those situations have been as they've been. And so when reviewing the time frame of the 1994 solar eclipse backwards about 20-25 years, and then from the time frame of 2017 to this year of 2022, but backwards to 1994, in my opinion, you can see certain things that co-align in a linear way that can be noticed and paid attention to. And so while individuals have had issues accepting that certain employments, they are as they are, there are sometimes no pretty way to explain it. And yet you have individuals hypothetically similar to the Dodge drafters that stirred up needless drama because they had their feelings as far as whatever aspects of and those particular situations to the comparisons. And I would guesstimate any individual who has any military background, especially in regards to the Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Iraq and Afghanistan, I would not be surprised if those individuals had certain similarities as to what veterans from the Vietnam and Korean War dealt with because of the political aspects, though in addition to that, the way certain factors were among the general public, in my opinion. And so there is the fact that you have these veterans who are capable to bring forward the truth. It might not be in the prettiest words, though it's still the truth as far as, but you have to be capable to clarify and distinguish between, because that's a reason to end all stolen valor. Not just because of, in respect to those who actually earned the valor because of their work, but also in regards of everyone that they've been involved to those time frames in whichever capacities of. And so while my ex-in-laws didn't listen to Grandpa Nichols, didn't even pay attention to what I had brought forward, I dealt with the same thing. There are plenty of people in the state of Texas. Oh, you had a head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, what do you know? I dealt with that as a child. Oh, you're a child, what do you know? So what, you had a nightmare? Oh, well, just because at Old Tenet Presbyterian Church, just because you had a vision that this was occur, well, you're still just a child. No, just accept the facts. As far as second grade, 1993, as well as 2001, And so those particular factors. So I dealt with that with my ex-in-laws, where they, oh, well, you had a head injury. What do you know? You didn't graduate basic training. Yeah, except I know what the IRR aspects are, and Grandpa Nichols backed me up. I'm sure there are other individuals who today, in the year of 2022, among others, who could very much clarify, yeah, if you get called on IRR, you are not going to choose your rank. You are not going to choose your MOS. You only have that when you first enlist or go in as an officer or chief warrant officer. The only way that you get to choose is if, and you're not really you don't really get to choose if you're activated on IRR, because if the only way your MOS can change is if the training and education exceeds in other areas. And that is the only time frame where your rank and or MOS can be changed in that IRR standard. So those attempts regarding Grandpa Nichols and I to my ex-in-laws, as they didn't want to listen because they thought they knew better, because one, regarding Georgia, she seemed to think that the Air Force was the exact same as the Army. The irony of ironies as to how many Air Force individuals try to separate themselves from the Army, and then you have that dependent trying to claim that they're one and the same. And anybody who's been through, all you have to do is look at the time frame of basic training, but that's not the only factor, because there are differences as to the type of training as well. And so, yeah, the Army has what time frame it does, and the Air Force has it only in one location. Well, the reality to the Air Force having basic training for enlisted soldiers in one location is because what's really going to be a difference? You're going to be in a building somewhere. It doesn't really matter what the climate is, where you go. This is an annoyance to the Army, the Coasties, the Marine Corps, and the Navy, because the Air Force goes to basic training in only one location, and then, oh, it's hotter here, it's colder here, and so on and so forth, and this building is this, and in the Air Force we have that, and there are those who know exactly what I'm referring to. The Army, well, you go to basic training where you go to basic training, and you might not even go to basic training where it says you're going to go to basic training, depending on your clearance, depending on your background, because if you have certain individuals in your family, as far as certain things are concerned, whatever background of and or clearance of, you might have paperwork that says you're going to go somewhere, and then you go where you go. So in regards of the differences as to IRR, well, you go where you go. It's just the facts. I can acknowledge complaining in reference to my house because I had everything arranged where everything was ideal and perfect and everything like that, and all the work that I did. And because of, yes, I had contractors take care of the stuff. It's still that anybody who works on a house, it's a certain situation. My biological father would understand the most in that capacity because of the 5-car garage with the shed attached that I assisted, not as much as work as he had done, but that clarification as to, because of all of the work that I did in my house, as far as all the planning and research and development and all that sort of stuff. And I did all of the painting. I didn't have any assistants in regards to, but anyway, it's a personal thing. It's personal, just is as it is. Nonetheless, in reference to the situations as to the dress blues, well, I made attempts to explain to my biological mother, biological father, biological little sister about the reality as to the situation during the time frame of from 2000 through. And in that capacity, they didn't have the knowledge or understanding. Their main thing was, oh, well, he graduated basic training. Whoop-de-doo, that doesn't mean anything. It does. It means something in certain factors. and yet I'm the one and only sponsor in comparison. So, my ex-in-laws, as to those situations, and that while my biological mother and or biological father and or biological little sister, if they were to actually be honest with themselves, they actually were prevented and saved from having to deal with certain things in comparison, though I'm sure they probably wouldn't have thought about that at that point in time because of other situations and their feelings and those capacities. So in regards of my ex-in-laws and how they had argued with the chief warrant officer tree, there's the female regarding Georgia, and I don't know if she had ever seen a chief warrant officer in the Air Force, and her trying to utilize any sort of capacity as any last-ditch effort, which just failed each and every time and only showed her guilt more and more and more and more. And she showed her two, they're technically daughters that, and it is as it is. Well, when you take in consideration to technology and how it's developed over the time frame, well, you have one of the two, okay, so the eldest of that one was named purposefully after one of the aunts who had literally been diagnosed with a whole bunch of mental health disorders. That was her first name, regarding Sandra. Spelled the same way, all that sort of stuff. The situation as to the house in Chandler Mountain, so on and so forth, all those factors as to Sandra and how she didn't even see that she was born in 1984. And those additional factors regarding whatever movies her mom grew up watching. And then to name her Sandra in those references. I suppose there is a joke that can be made the first time I met her mother, Mary. Well, she got bit in the face by a chihuahua that looked like it swallowed a football and had little toothpick legs named Julio, and her face was all bloody, so she was a Bloody Mary. And, you know, I've worked, or volunteered, I should say, in regards to at Sapphire, where they have a bar, and, you know, there is a celery stick, and celery is just empty calories, and it's hollow, so however you view that. That might be me, might be apropos. Now, so in reference, so there's, you know, that one as far as, and then her allowance to name her little sister. And so there's this program I heard about called MK Ultra. And so Sandra, who was named after a mental health issue, though also possessed, because when you take in consideration as to the Chandler Mountain house, with the heavy Coke bottle that rolled across the floor, rolled up the wall, slowly rolled down the wall, and then slowly rolled back to the areas of, as to, and there have been plenty of other locations where hauntings have been found to be accurate. Again, Old Tenant Presbyterian Church, I warned as far as that's concerned, and a bunch of people thought that I was joking. So in those particular references, I was working on my Medal of Honor art project, and so there's those facts. I didn't think anybody would actually not have intelligence. I figured, you know, it would be intelligent to ask what would be required. However, I also explained in regards of finding a silver lining, and so if that was clarified, well, you know, then common sense, it's common sense. So anyway, in reference to the situations, Ariel, or Sandra's little sister, is named after the Little Mermaid movie. And that is the epitome of the MK Ultra, right there. Where the mom goes and names the eldest after a situation as to her favorite types of movies. And then, you know, passing along that in the next generation, as to Sandra being allowed to pick a name. And that's where Ariel comes in, though the irony as to her middle name, Nicole. And so my dead ex-husband, my children's biological father, their dead relative as far as that's concerned, and then they wanted to be disrespectful to the Holy Roman Catholic Church as well as being disrespectful to the armed forces of the United States of America, because they knew that not only in reference to the Chief Warrant Officer Tree having told my ex-mother-in-law that she didn't have any rights, telling my ex-sisters-in-law, but well, technically all three of them, they didn't have any rights, and then telling all of the children, as far as the equivalent of 8 cousins at that time, they absolutely did not have any rights. So their choice to nitpick as far as their choices were to go to an Asian store, get a bunch of religious items, knowing that their dead relative was an atheist and did not believe in anything. And the irony of ironies, for those who can answer this question to my sermon monologue lecture, who had what problems regarding which aunt that Sandra was named after? So those particular factors, they wanted to be spiteful, and they wanted to go and show the army by going and getting religious items, not paying attention that they'd insult the Holy Roman Catholic Church, which I didn't personally arrange. I had everything arranged through the military. Everything was perfectly. See, this is exactly what I'm referring to as far as, and plenty can understand that. And so, you know, I informed the Holy Roman Catholic Church, which I didn't have to. There wasn't any legal there was not any legal obligation for me to inform that particular priest at all. It was a moral obligation. Yes, I went to Old Tennant Presbyterian Church, which when you take that in consideration as to the Presbyterians, as to the history of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, there are those factors. Well, I did attend St. John Vianney High School. And so out of respect, I informed. Didn't have to. Though I did. And said, when the priest had asked me, well, why should I believe you? I know them and that sort of stuff. All you have to do is look. It's your church as far as this factor as to the situations. You're the one who's going to do those particular aspects of. If you just look, you'll learn, and you'll see. You could trust me, though do verify. You could not trust me, and you can verify, and then you might trust me. And it is what it is. I'm not going to tell you to do so. I'll let you know exactly what to look at. And so I went on my way, and instead of the services occurring in the actual cathedral, which is something my ex-in-laws need to take in additional consideration as to how the Chief Warrant Officer Tree situation went, they complained that the services occurred in the cafeteria in comparison to the cathedral, which was every sign that they needed to know exactly how everything was going to be. So, in that hypothetical, okay. So, in reference to those who would know, there's those situations as to the IRR. There's the situations as to JCPenney Pictures. There's the time frame of 2006-2007 time frame where the dress blues that would be in that JCPenney picture were worn around the city of San Antonio. Worn near the VA hospital in the medical center. worn around the VA facility off of Eckerd. My original house in San Antonio is not far from that. There's literally military throughout that neighborhood from whatever genre there is also, or era, I should say, because of the different war times. I say genre because of the fact that the World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Afghanistan and Iraq War, they're all different, though they have certain similarities as far as the more current time frames. So then you have the situations to take in consideration that my ex-in-laws didn't want to pay attention to those factors, which my biological mother, biological father, biological little sister didn't know either, though, blood is thicker than water. They may not have liked certain things. I'm going to guesstimate they might appreciate certain other factors in the long term compared to, especially, those who know my biological little sister as to, pictures and all that. And so, is as it is, I just prevented some of that, and that's all. It is what it, but it is as it is. Even though I'm a Republican and they're Democrats. So, in that reference, those particular ex-in-laws, they decided, because the cousins thought it would be a good idea, they wanted to do that because they thought their right meant something in comparison. And so they convinced Grandma Nichols to go to the store, and they all got their little religious symbols, and they said whatever they said, and then they put that into the casket before the priest completed it. Now, I warned them that they really didn't want to do that. Similar to Old Testament Presbyterian Church regarding the basement cellar, I gave these warnings. They didn't want to listen to me. They thought I was being a bitter ex-wife in comparison to the fact that I had everything arranged. Grandpa Nichols warned them to not overstep those lines. And so, those types, as to somebody says, don't do that, those temper tantrums, okay, well, you'll learn. One way or another, you'll learn. And so in these factors, they had their temper tantrums. They, all of them, with the exception of one, if I remember correctly, which is an irony as to the name, had gone and gotten something, and, their little religious factors in comparison to what I allowed my son and my daughter to pick, which were not religious. They were different things. So my son got a skateboard and put it in there because of, and then my daughter got a rainbow-colored sea turtle and put that in there. And okay, that's fine because, despite certain things, it is as it is. So, put that in there, shut it. It's over. So, those individuals had to deal with those factors and in a larger way. Well, I have known that a lot of people have wished that I would be more like that in comparison. Well, what is it to be more like that? The translation for that would translate to, instead of being honest and in any capacity, stealing valor. No, I'm okay not doing that. I'm not willing to upset individuals who earned valor because obviously, hypothetically, then there's how you can get in trouble in those particular references because he was looking at being court-martialed in comparison to being medically retired. I'm not going to do any of that. I prefer to not have those problems. Then there are the credit situations where, well, all of his work prior was discredited because of, automatically. And so while Dr. Sun and Dr. Sun might be upset in reference to the lab, there are those factors in other situations as to the reality, which is as it is. Actually know a thing or two. Other than the fact that it was my research project and it was my work and my ideas and et cetera, I came up with the knowledge, well, I came up with the project as to the T genome. I actually came up with that when in the Lincoln Green apartment complex. That was my idea. And the timing and so on and so forth. I was invited to Marine and Science Technology School. So then there's the medium work and I suppose pun intended. Nonetheless, so there are those situations and that's a really good example as to because of. So, I know that there are those who wish that I had been more like that. I'm okay being myself. May not be the prettiest, may not be the smartest, may not be the fastest, yet I'm me. I'm not willing to allow certain things, and some obviously can be upset by that, though I tend to have a different viewpoint, and I take things seriously, and I know I'm not the only one, though I also look at not just in reference to myself, or in the short term, I look towards a long term and longer term, and to the longest term. I've done that for a while, well before my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. I can make a joke in regards of scuba diving, because that is definitely a long drop and a long swim, if you know the actual distance, though. In comparison, in my defense, for those who might have an issue, well, swimming against a riptide, undertow, Atlantic area, northeast area of the Atlantic area of the oceanic waters in the winter months is probably, hypothetically, I don't know the arithmetic, probably the kinetic velocity of the energy regarding the resistance and so on and so forth, probably a little bit stronger than just going straight down like in an elevator and then going straight up afterwards. Maybe. Probably not as much work, at all. Probably. I could be inaccurate, I'm not certain. I didn't take the time when I was doing my work to do any of those calculations. I apologize, I suppose, if I'm supposed to apologize for that. So I was more concerned about handling business and taking care of situations. That's all. So, in that, just a joke, so in that reference as to Father's Day is coming up. Well, I would guesstimate my biological father, despite being upset during the time frame in 2008, in the long term, into the longest term, he might appreciate that. He had been a little bit superstitious, especially after what occurred regarding Old Tennant Presbyterian Church, and how accurate I was. So he didn't have to deal with that. My biological mother, anybody who's ever seen her upset, well, it is as it is. And then there's my biological little sister, and despite whatever abomination of that, there's that. And so, I don't know the Millers at all, that I know of. However, possibly, hypothetically, if they're actually in elected, what have you, or political something another, they might be okay in regards of the hypothetical situations of that perspective, hypothetically. And so, I may know a thing or two. I might have a little bit of sight. And so it is as it is, despite the situations regarding how my biological little sister had been and those factors. And so it is as it is, there are the viewpoints as to how some are regarding relationships, though, length of time. Anyway, so my ex-in-laws, well, I was respectful to Grandpa Nichols. I respect, despite not being my actual father or anything like that, and then respectful to who is a stepdad, which would be Tony, regarding my ex-brother-in-law, in that reference, as well as despite the other factors as to his wife and whatever, and those two abominations, is as it is. And so, despite certain things. So those factors as to the chief warrant officer tree. Now here's that situation. So I arrive after hours and hours of driving, and I was the only one who drove, which, yes, I'm accustomed to, though it does get annoying after a while. Hypothetically, in the time frame of 2000 through the year of 2008, I may have actually driven more miles than a full-time semi-truck driver. Hypothetically. I don't know. I mean, granted, it wasn't every weekend or every month, it was every month, at minimum once a month from 2000 to 2006-ish, once a month, if not twice a month, sometimes 3 times a month. Even though there's the first and final separations, I'm giving that leeway as to. So from San Antonio to Fort Worth and Fort Worth back to San Antonio, then non-stop, by the way. I don't know, does that make me a pilot regarding airplanes? Because that's a different driving. And so then in 2007, then usually on average every weekend, as far as that's concerned. Then in reference to my daughter's hospitalizations and all of those miles regarding Carrollton to Merrill Hill and back before moving, and then Irving to Little Rock, Arkansas, and back to Irving, Texas, not including events or anything like that. And that's before my Medal of Honor Art Project trips, as far as that's concerned. Remember, I also drove from, Carrollton, Texas, all the way out to Fort or White Settlement, Texas, back to Carrollton, Texas, before going out to Georgia, then down and all the way through Florida, and then, back to, then through to Alabama, up through Tennessee, back to the state of Texas. That particular trip, after my scuba diving, as far as that's concerned, I was, there are people, I've heard of these comedians, I flew here, my arms are tired. Yeah, I don't know. And so, and then there's my Medal of Honor Art Project trips and all that. So, yeah, I've done a little bit of traveling, just a little bit. I don't know if it's the equivalent as to, though possibly around a bit of a time frame. So anyway, every 2 weeks from Irving, Texas to Little Rock, Arkansas and back in a day. So, by myself, and so that whole trip to Florida, all of the children were minors. I did all the driving, every mile. Yep. So anyway, similarly to scuba diving. So, regards to the time frame at which I arrived and took my son and my daughter to the latrine, yes, I'm sure Chief Warrant Officer Tree was probably taking it back where it's, don't you have a more important golf game to be at? Chief Warrant Officer Tree, I thought you guys would be phased out of the Army. I heard that back in the year 2000. Good to see you're still around. Excuse me, I will speak with you in a minute after I take care of my son and my daughter. And again, for those who understand that IRR situation, okay, so in E5, the E7 was not allowed because he was too low ranking, but a Chief Warrant Officer Tree was just right to be there as the funerary director. So anything my ex-in-laws wish as far as that's concerned, well, happy Father's Day, pay attention to details, wake up. And so, that E7 was not high-ranking enough to even attend. It was only E8 and E9er that were allowed for an E5. Go take a look at those pictures of the casket that my ex-in-laws were so happy to take. Comparison to that JCPenney picture. So then you have, because that's all you really need, so, but, details as far as CID and those factors as well, in conjunction to medical hold unit or warrior transition unit and, JCPenney pictures in Ingram Park Mall, which is in San Antonio, Texas, also known as Military City, USA now, after walking around the city of San Antonio, just look at where my house was in San Antonio and look at the address to the VA hospital or any VA facility. Let's do some math, CID. I don't know why I got interrogated for hours. Just saying. Nonetheless, just pointing this out there. So then you have this situation where, I get my son and my daughter taken care of. We go to this business office-ish area, and the Chief Warrant Officer Tree is at the head of the table. I'm at the other head of the table. Got some of my ex-in-laws on one side, some of my ex-in-laws on the other side, my son and my daughter on my side, and Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. Either that or Susan Mealing had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, with an ex-in-law here and an ex-in-law there, Chief Warrant Officer Tree here, son and daughter over there. Reverend Susan Mealing had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. Hi, E-O and I-G, and so... is an ass. So, you have these situations, the nieces and nephews of my ex-in-laws, they're all temper tantrumy because that Chief Warrant Officer Tree, which anybody who's ever met a Chief Warrant Officer, they thought the Chief Warrant Officer Tree was mean. Think about that. They thought the Chief Warrant Officer Tree, anybody who's ever worked with a Chief Warrant Officer, they know that they are some of the softer, kinder individuals compared to the Chief Warrant Officer Tree. They thought he was mean. So then they, got to hear me. They thought he was mean for telling them no. So then, when the Chief Warrant Officer Tree said, and anybody who's worked with a Chief Warrant Officer, you probably recognize this, he, grabs the picture from the JCPenney picture, but in a larger size, and he's like, so, I have questions about this. And then there's, so you have one ex-sister-in-law, I don't know what you think here, that's Susie, because I don't know what you're bringing this up here for, what's going on, blah, 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 you made us wait to talk about this, and da, 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 da. Then you have, bet you feel sympathy for that Chief Warrant Officer Tree now, don't you? Then you have the other ex-in-laws, the ones from Oklahoma, they're just, and there those ones go. And And then you have my ex-mother-in-law, I did not, so on and so forth. And she's shorter than me. So those. And then you have, oh, well, now you did. Why'd you make us wait all this time? And so then I was like, and I said, shut up. You take care of this. You take care of this. You watch my son and my daughter, Chief Warrant Officer Tree. Let's go outside. You smoke? Yeah, I smoke. I smoke cigars. Let's go. You two, James and Lydia, you better be good. You listen and do as you are told. I will be right back. As far as you're concerned, you will do as I have said. Ready, Chief? In my defense, I had driven a few hours and I was not in the mood to deal with some stuff. So, we went for a walk. I told the chief, this is what's going to happen. The trifling females are going to try to camouflage. We're in a cemetery, mind you, and there are flat markers and really short markers. But they're going to try to camouflage and listen to us. And then the two related to, their dead relative, those two are going to come out and they're going to try, and we're going to just keep walking until all of them go back inside, and we're going to talk after that. And you can ask me whatever you got to ask me. That's fine. I'll answer your questions honestly. I'm going to guess that you may know who I am. And let's walk. And on time. And 3, 2, 1. Here comes trifling ones out of the Georgia area. 3, 2, 1. Here's the trifling ones out of Fort Worth. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Let's talk about the weather. So about half hour later, they all finally went away, and then I was asked questions, and I was asked, would I be surprised if my dead ex-husband lied? No, not at all. Went over a few things, didn't know anything about the rack at that point in time, and so went over several factors, and then, because of this, is it okay? And it was known that I didn't go to the memorial service regarding, that. Is it okay that we had, it's a little late to ask, but is it okay that we did kind of a covering of the rack that, it's you said it's stolen valor. I didn't remember at the time because of everything that was going on beforehand as to what Grandpa Nichols had brought up. No, that's fine. I don't want to disrespect on the military base. No. On military installation, absolutely not. No, I don't. I am not offended by that. I apologize. I didn't know though. I didn't graduate basic training though, so I don't know those particular situations. And went from there, and it was as it was. So then, went inside, and I'll go deal with this. So went in, and ex-in-laws and those who know. So it's a real quick break on that. So in the year 2001, I gave birth to my son. In the year 2002, I was pregnant with my daughter. My son's birthday party was at the McDonald's in Forest Hill, off of 20 for those who know. And so I had been informed that there was going to be a specialty birthday cake. Then there was some issues, so I told the McDonald's employees what I informed them. It wasn't that big of a deal to me in that comparison, except my ex-in-laws being the way they are. And okay, fine, whatever it is as it is. They went to go and defrost the cake as far as that was concerned. And then my ex-sister-in-law, Susie in that reference, wanted to stay in the spot until whatever, and I informed her that I was informed by the McDonald's employees, no, we're gonna move out of the way. There are other people who paid. They paid for this, get out of the way. And so, pregnant with my daughter, mind you, subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain, still. Have the other half of McDonald's, which is full of whoever's family for their birthday that started coming in, as well as other customers. And my ex-sister-in-law, Susie Marie Nichols Lopez at that time, Sweeney now, and this, that, and the other, big hoopla, whatever. Ugh. So I pick up all of the birthday presents and I start moving things because I'm not dealing with it. I just am not dealing with it. She gets offended. I don't care. Excuse me, I apologize. Females are like, no, that's fine. No, that's fine. Thank you. It's doing what I can. And females are like, no, it's okay, Mama. We see that you aren't them. We appreciate you. Apologize, I'm just doing this. No need to apologize. Okay. Mind you, again, I'm pregnant. It's September, okay? Or August, either way, doesn't matter in Texas. Not really for those who actually have lived there and been pregnant in the state of Texas. And so, for the answer for this sermon monologue lecture. And so I'm moving all of this stuff, then my ex-sister-in-law uses all sorts of words after some stuff happens, and then just they get into a physical altercation. I pick up a child to get, so mind you, I am hugely pregnant. I gained 70 pounds when I was pregnant with my son. I lost about 35 pounds before I got pregnant with my daughter. And then I gained another 75 pounds. My son later on decided to try to tell me, well, my sister made you fatter than I did. He lived after saying that, I'm just saying. Just pointing that out there in regards to females, you understand. And or any certain types of gay males, because I know you know, and yes. So, I'm just hugely, here, let me get all this and move this over here, that's fine, got this big old huge belly with all this stuff. No, that's fine, it is what it is. And so then the fight occurs, so with my huge belly, it's like, all right, I have to make it I got it, it's okay. I got yelled at by my ex-sister-in-law because I didn't get involved in the fight. Yeah, no, I'm pregnant with my daughter. I'm actually about life in comparison, and even still, it's your fault for starting stuff that you shouldn't have started. And so in Fort Worth Forest Hill, while pregnant, with my daughter, with my son, that was just turning 1, and all that sort of stuff. No, you were in the wrong. Flat out, you were in the wrong. Apologize to these males who started showing up. And they're like, nah, it's cool, Mom. It's all good. We were told about you. Oh, okay. I don't know what to think of that right now. Hopefully it's good. And they're like, it's good. Okay. Cool. I'm just gonna... I didn't have my hair at that time, by the way, okay? Didn't have tattoos. And so it was as it was. So that's kind of a reference point as to, for those who remember that McDonald's situation. So I'm sure you feel sympathy for that Chief Warrant Officer Tree because her sister was there too. And just as similarly, you're wrong, and you're wrong, but then you have to have extra sympathy for the Chief Warrant Officer Tree because their daughters were there too. Yeah, so I'm just saying. So enlisted and officers, you take that in consideration when it comes to Chief Warrant Officer trees, because think about what metaphors might be. Hypothetically. I don't have specific examples, though I'm sure some chief warrant officer 3s and 4s and 1 and 2 might hypothetically have a similar viewpoint as to my biological father's viewpoint as to finding the silver lining. As well as finding a silver lining, as it is. So. Choices, so important. So important. So in those references, okay, no, I'll save you, Chief Warrant Officer Tree. I'll jump on this and it's okay. He didn't know what he was walking into, so it was one of those, it's okay. He may have thought he had whatever regarding in the military. No, it's okay, it's okay. It's okay, got you. Can make the joke as far as that's concerned. Anyway, so then, so it's Father's Day coming up. So, I took care, I did what I could, not the same, but, it's okay. He may be a father, I don't know. So there's that. And there. Here's something to, so there's a meme where it's got a military guy and it's the M40 or whatever and stuff like that. Here's something to remember me by ex-in-laws. For that extra, different type of double barred, because, there were Lieutenant Colonel who was, high ranking enough compared to that E7, because only one captain was high ranking enough, only because he was the company commander. So for those who understand that regarding the IRR, and so, otherwise, there was one major that was there. He was in the brigade, so he was the only one who was high ranking enough to be allowed there. And then there was, the lieutenant colonels and colonels. They were high ranking enough for that E5 situation. Yeah. With the IRR and all that, and then the dress blue rack situation. And so, the two different 2-stars, they may have been under a different impression, in comparison. However, it is as it is in that hypothetical, as far as that was concerned. And so, where some people may think that, and this is my opinion, okay? So, yes, I understand there are times where you don't want to have a certain viewpoint. And so here's a bronze star. I'm not willing to teach my son and my daughter that stolen valor is acceptable. So, I called it right then and there. Grandpa Nichols was like, because I had shown him, look at the rank, E5. He had already known about the pictures and everything, and he just looked over at me and he was like, oh my God, Susan, what? Be cool. It's okay. It's all right. Don't worry. It's okay. So it was as it was at the time frame. And it went as it did, and so it was just one of those. It wasn't a, in my opinion, I don't view things the same way. And so there are those who actually earn the Bronze Star. And so there's that capacity to taking into consideration. And so, yeah, I went through the chain of command and all that sort of stuff and handled things the way I did. Whether they liked it or not, it is as it is, still the clarifications and verifications regarding quite a few things, I'm sure, because, I'm sure it was thought that I'm the sponsor. Yeah, I am. I'm the sponsor. Yeah. Instead. So then there's those factors as to that in comparison, which it is as it is. It's all right. So, while my ex-in-laws, should be grateful for Grandpa Nichols, because Grandpa Nichols is who they had those benefits from. So while they may have had whatever viewpoint regarding, it was Grandpa Nichols who had made it possible for my ex-mother-in-law to be allowed in the country of the United States of America. It was Grandpa Nichols who got the capacity for, despite whatever, for those people to have had health care and education benefits. That was Grandpa Nichols. As far as what they chose to do is whatever they chose to do. In comparison, they focused wrongly, as Grandpa Nichols told them back then, as to those situations regarding that rack. And so their choices as far as that's concerned. So while my ex-in-laws, especially the females in those capacities, as well as those that were, bred, they may have had whatever feelings, well, could have learned directly from Grandpa Nichols. But Grandpa Nichols' words were direct and to the point. Didn't play games, didn't do stereotype, but not a stereotype. Because not all veterans are in that capacity. So you have individuals in that particular reference where, in certain regards, if stuff needs to be taken care of, they're gonna, like anybody though, anybody does that, and you don't even have to have that. If something needs to be taken care of, it needs to be taken care of. It is as it is. And so there are those factors. So you have the time frame of the 1994 solar eclipse to the 2017 solar eclipse. There's been the updates to my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, through my website, www.susanmealing.com. It's the same as www.ladydorybell.com. And those particular situations that have had to be brought forward in the multitude of are as they are. Well, in regards of the reasons why I'm going to guesstimate one of many as to why it's now Military City, USA in comparison to San Antonio. One of many reasons. I had called people out well before then, well before 2008. In the reference at Graham Central Station, you have the group of people where one guy tried to say he had done thousands of halo jumps through the bridle loop. For anybody who knows parachute aspects, especially where the bridle loop is and the size, and he said he did thousands in that bridle loop. I don't think so. No, not at all. Not even close. And so in those references, those factors as well to take into consideration. Reasons why you end stolen valor are a multitude. So when you, in conjunction, take in consideration as to, well, what is feminism? Well, feminism is for equality, where yes, females are acknowledged for what their capabilities are, and yes, in certain times, if the need of assistance, the actual need, but while being equal in regards to the male gender in those references. And so those factors are important. They always have been, in my opinion. And so while there was a lot of stuff that you can see from the time frame as to both back in the 20 years or 25 years before 1994, as to that solar eclipse, to the time frame in between 1994 to 2017 solar eclipse, even to this year of 2022, something to review, especially with the technological factors. Because you're to know the truth. I appreciate your time. Make sure to subscribe to my official YouTube channel, like my official YouTube videos, and go to my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com. And as it's known, there are quite a few situations as to the reasons why there is now the formation of the U.S. Space Force and the work that NASA has been doing for decades, and realistically taking consideration that back in the time frame when NASA was first formed, well, how long did it actually take to do paperwork back then to have that brought forward? You guys have a good day. Today is the 14th of June, 2022. There are reasons why truth is extremely important. Honesty is extremely important, because sometimes when certain situations occur, well, if you're actually called on IRR, well, you better know the truth. And when you have stuff that you have to take care of, hesitation is not an option. Don't get to choose when, if it's actual IRR. It's just facts, especially when you take those situations into consideration. So if in reference to that, my biological mother and or biological father and or biological little sister and or the San Antonio pagan community, who I had informed as to my backyard situation during a vision quest, as to those situations, and then the knowledge of me being medically retired from the Army. Well, that's not a consent to those college students at all. It's not a consent regarding quite a few other factors. So then later, in regards of 2005 and Wilford Hall as to the MPs, and that, as well as the situations which plenty of veterans, active duty, National Guard reservists, and even dependents know as far as those situations. Well, no, it's not a right of yours to know at all. Just because of what you feel you might have a right to doesn't necessarily translate to that. And when you take in consideration that the situations regarding 1998 to Columbine, though inner cities have been dealing with situations far longer, and then you have the Uvalde, Texas thing in 2022, well, why would it be that regarding Irving 2011, I didn't bring that forward? Why would it be in reference to my scuba diving? Whose businesses would that actually be? Because realistically, I'm the one that handled it. I'm the one that took care of it. And if people who I knew in person, face-to-face in person, were actually responsible and mature in comparison, that would have been a different ball of wax. However, I also know that it was only less than a full year since the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain wasn't in the MRIs and CAT scans. That doesn't translate to other people having those rights that they thought they had, especially in the civilian sector. So yes, I waited until 2019, that 10-year point, technically 2018, because of realizing the time to know. So yeah, I've been dealing with things for quite a few decades, which I've brought forward through my journal blog, the updates in the Ornery PSA on my website, www.susanmeling.com, well beyond the Irving 2011, well beyond the Indiana 1999. I've brought up in reference to my grandpa Gavin and individuals that before my head injury, the black suits with the white button-down shirts and black ties. And yes, even in reference to my basic training regarding one individual, though also in Illinois when I worked in certain locations and their specific mannerisms. And so, yes, there's 2012 as well, as to not even a full year, if I remember correctly, from the first, not even a full year from the first Irving 2011 situation, as to an irony regarding that. And so, yeah, then there are some pictures, only a few. There's only, if I remember correctly, one event picture that has bruising from mainly the scuba diving, although there were other things that were being dealt with at that time. I had a lot of driving that I had to take care of, and not just in regard to Florida, out in the Atlantic area, the oceanic waters at that time of what I was dealing with, though also out in the Gulf of Mexico, and those factors as to what I was handling as best as I could, because who was I going to contact? Who was I going to ask? I mean, realistically. And I kind of figured, especially when it came to if I was remembered regarding certain individuals, that time frame in New Jersey. Don't know though, because of the facts as to 2001, that situation. Though it tended to be where usually there was a guy or two after a certain, if it wasn't immediately after, it was after a certain number of situations. As to those particular factors because of, and then yes, if I remember correctly, actually, not only after Irving, though there was a picture I took of my leg after not pulling my leg as far as a joke situation, no, pulling the remnants as to what I dealt with as to that area out by the Vandenberg as to, well, as I said, I don't know how anybody can find the oceanic areas romantic. There's just no romance that I can personally think of, but then again, I usually handle things, so it's a different viewpoint completely. And so there are different species in the oceanic waters. There are many, many different species. And so you have the Tic Tac video to refer to, for one. There are some pictures and videos that I've posted in reference to my Instagram. For some, I think I have put some through my official YouTube channel as well. Though I usually put it through Instagram, so for those. And then through Facebook automatically. And so I'm grateful and thankful that that's an easier factor for those references. And so, But yeah, that is as it is. You have a good day. Thank you for your time. Subscribe to my official YouTube channel, like my official YouTube videos, and share the links. In conjunction to that, go to my website, www.susanmeling.com, which is the same as www.ladydoribell.com. Today is 14th of June, 2022. 14 June 2022.